The theme for this Sunday, the Advent theme is the animals. The animals that were and are presumed to have been present at the stable. We presume there was a stable because we don't find evidence of a stable in any of the texts that we use to base our stories of Christmas on. We read about a manger, and then we imply that there must have been a stable to accommodate this manger. And we read about a whole collection of animals, domesticated animals, and then in the one hymn that we sung, it's also a reference to doves, which were probably not domesticated doves. But we know that the camels were present and that there were oxen or an ox or a cow. And according to the carol, it was a brown and a white cow. Sounds like a Guernsey to me or some Swiss milking cow. But yeah, and then there were naturally sheep, because the shepherds part of the stories, and there was a donkey because Mary had to ride on the donkey to get to Bethlehem from Nazareth, and so forth. So where does this come from, all these animals and their presence around the manger in the stable that we have constructed? It comes mainly from texts in the Old Testament that the early Christian church, not the authors of the gospel stories, Matthew and Luke, that have stories about the birth of Jesus in them, but the early Christian church, probably initially at least being firmly Jewish, went back to their text, their sacred text, the Old Testament, and found these references that they said, this speaks about Jesus and his birth. And for instance, about the camels, say that there were wise men that come with gifts of frankincense and gold from the east. We read that in Psalm 72, where it is described, the people, the kings from Sheba will come to pay homage to the king that's going to be born, that will rule with justice and so forth. Psalm 72. Then we also find, mostly in the book of Isaiah, references to oxen and to donkeys that knows where the manger is and that will pay homage to their owner and to someone that is going to be born as well. So these stories that we still have today were reconstructed, created by the early Christians. And right through, after the early Christian church, right through the medieval period, the Middle Ages, we find a continuation of new stories being created and added onto, and new interpretations emerging. I've referenced the carol that we sang. It was a carol that probably came from the 12th century in France. It was a Latin song that they adopted then as a Christmas carol. And it was further worked on throughout the history of the church. And then in, I think it's 1920, the present words, the text, the lyrics were added and written for this carol. So there was continuation of creation of stories about the birth and the animals that were around, that were present there. There is also in art and in just narratives and legends and so forth, a continuation of new material being added to these animals that we know they were present there. They witnessed the birth. They were part of the story that happened, the event that took place there. One instance around that as well is perhaps the Norwegian folk legend about the animals with a title, or that is known as the animals when animals could speak for one night. It is a legend, as I say, in the Norwegian culture, an ancient one, of the animals that for that one night had the gift of speech. And it's interesting. The animals would not allow the pig into the stable because a pig was an impure animal in Jewish culture. So the ox and the ass and I don't think the doves were part of that one. But the camels and the rest of them, they said, no, the pigs stay outside, they're impure, and they're dirty. We don't want them in the stable. And so they carry on, and through the night, these animals came to the realization, according to this legend, that they were discriminating against the pig for not allowing the pig to be part of this event. And they were also later on saying the humans are not worthy to come into the stable because look what they do to the world. And look the way that they behave. They are not worthy to be present at the birth of the Savior. And then they all had a change of heart, as one can imagine. And they accepted the pig, and they allowed humans to be part of the story after the pig. So that's perhaps a story in itself there. So that story was created on the basis of the stories that was read into the text that Luke and Matthew gave us, and that was built on and added to. I think a beautiful story. These domesticated animals at the service of humans and acting out human thoughts and motives, discrimination and. Trying through the eyes of the person or the people that created that legend to bring a lesson to humans. Now, what shall we do with this material? Shall we say, there's none of it in the Bible, so let's scrap all the stories? I don't think it will be good, because Christmas pageants will be poorly attended if there are no animals involved there. You know, half the pageant will be gone. The role players, what will you assign children to play if there are no animals? Or should we say, no, truth is only what is factual? If we can historically prove that there were animals through some excavation by some Harvard archaeologist, then we can say, okay, the birth stories are true, and yes, there were animals, and they were good, they were well behaved, and blah, blah, blah. Should we put a straitjacket on the beautiful stories that were created by people around something sacred to them, and say only that which is factually, historically true has any value and is true? I think if we do that, we're violating the beauty of the truth of story and of narrative. We're violating the sacred exercise and the activity of taking something that is foundational and meaningful in that foundational sense and trying to interpret the current environment and make it applicable and meaningful and relevant for the time in which it originated. I think it is a sad testimony to the modern spirit that we, in a technocratic way, try to say only that which we can prove is true, or that we can verify through research that is true. I think the biggest truths are most often conveyed by things that has nothing to do with facts or research. And I'm not saying throw research out or that we should live in a reality that is not fact-based. On the contrary, those of you that know me a bit better will know that that is very close to my heart. But when we deal with these accounts of the birth of Jesus and the animals that we accept and imply were there, I think we should not deny the truth that people that created those narratives for us tried to convey to us. I think it is also our sacred duty as people living today not to accept the interpretation, the understanding, only the narratives that previous generations created for us around the central truth. That is the lazy man's way, or the lazy woman's way, or the lazy child's way. Just to say, they thought these stories up, that's the end of it. That's all that we want, that's all we will stick to. And in the process, we often take a perceived glorious past that really never existed, and to try and say we should bring that back because that was such a wonderful time or that was such a wonderful thing. I think it is our sacred duty, especially as Christians, to take the material that our ancestors in faith relate to us, those traditions that we are fortunate to have, to rethink them, to reinterpret, and to find our own truths. Especially in the time of Advent, where we look forward to the birth of Jesus, and the one whose birth for Christians brought a new dispensation, a new way of experiencing reality, a new way of looking at reality, a new way of being in the world, a new way of living. For us, in the pews today, and for Kim behind the organ and for myself in the pulpit, I think it is our duty to look back at the pageant of last week with all the animals, and I couldn't always figure out which was which with the masks because I also looked from the side, but that's okay. I knew there were supposed to be donkeys and oxen and sheep. And I always wondered why we assumed they were sheep. You know, the shepherds guarded sheep. Goats were probably more prevalent in that area, but that's okay. They were sheep. But to look at the pageant and the kids portraying those animals, the presence of those animals at that momentous event that was reconstructed retrospectively for us by the authors of Luke and Matthew, to look at our pageant and the children there, and to create our own story in the Advent time, anticipating what Jesus spoke about. The hope of the kingdom. that there is a different way, that there is another way, that there is the way of God's love. And when God's love finds expression among people, and the way people are in the world, then perhaps there is also a new dispensation for animals. Not that I'm not saying that we shouldn't domesticate them and so forth, although I read one quote recently which is disturbing. A guy said that humans are the only species that domesticate animals and make them friends and then eat them. What a harsh commentary that I don't fully agree with. But I think it is our duty to look towards the future with hope, to embrace the hope of the kingdom, and for the sake of those little ones with their masks on, portraying the different animals, to look through the haze of Australia on fire, of the Amazon going up in smoke and ashes, to look through the haze of the ocean acidifying, to look through the smog and the fog of the melting tundra and the permafrost, and to look through the fog of war, and to say in this Advent time, around animal stories, we are people of hope. We base our hope not on a false hope and a denial of reality, but in spite of many things that we can point to and say, this is critical, this is devastatingly negative, this has severe consequences and implications in spite of that. While keeping our eye on reality, and while basing ourselves firmly in reality, to embrace the hope of Christmas. As Advent people looking forward to the alternative, to perhaps a mindset and a realization, and finally perhaps the dawning of the wisdom that we are not the ones to dominate the web of life that we are embedded in, that we are not the ones that can take charge of this wonder of evolution of 3.8 billion years on this planet, that it is perhaps time for us to embrace a new hope and find wisdom and inspiration in that, to say, as humanity, and especially as Christians who should lead the way, we will hopefully finally enter into a respectful, a cautious, perhaps even a hesitant way of being in the world. To do justice also to the web of life that birthed us, to acknowledge the sacred in that, and to acknowledge the God, the sacred in that creation as well. And let us walk together as God's people towards that dawn of a different mindset, leading the way in the light of the candles that is still burning, but hopefully also in the light of the flames in our hearts, to do justice also to animals and to all life, so that there may be a future for the little ones, portraying the animals that we place at the birth of Jesus. Let us embrace that truth. Let us live in that anticipation. Let us be the ones who lead the way towards that. Amen.